Now, with how common it is, you might think that the concept of male pattern hair loss, especially in Asian men, is no big deal at all, especially after a certain age. However, I do know that there are quite a number of people who are experiencing this relatively early on, perhaps in their 20s. And unfortunately or fortunately, I happen to be one of them who drew that genetic lottery card. But surprisingly, through the whole journey, from slightly receding temples to thinning hair, trying to save it, and then finally shaving it all off last week, I learned quite a bit about confidence after balding in my 20s, and that is exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel and back to another video. Today, we're going to be shifting gears from the whole hair loss and kind of cosmetic appearance side of things to focus on more of an inner work or inner confidence topic. And the topic of today is going to be what I learned about confidence after balding in my 20s. Now, if you haven't checked out my previous video about why I'm doing this whole series about going bald and all that kind of stuff, especially in Asia where it is not commonly accepted, then you're going to want to check out the video linked in the description below. But still, if that's not what you came in to watch, then let's jump right into the content. First of all, what this whole hair loss journey, and indeed a lot of life experiences while this whole journey was taking place, has allowed me to learn to put confidence into 3 key levels in increasing order of resilience. And these are, of course, simplified terms. There are probably some psychology terms that explain this in greater detail, and nonetheless, I'll try to explain what my experience has taught me. And the first level is going to be extrinsic, the second level, fake intrinsic, and third, intrinsic. Now, don't worry if this is sounding very cheem or very up in the air. I'll explain in just a bit. So first we have the extrinsic level of confidence, and that I feel is what a lot of us Asian guys tend to stay at. Now I call this extrinsic confidence because I kind of derive this from the whole, extrinsic motivation thing in self-determination theory, which you can go and read up on. Basically, it is outwardly driven and allows your self-worth to be derived from things like achievements, how much money you make, how well you do in school, what school you go to, whether you are a certain nationality or not, or even things like what car you drive, how much you live in the gym, and even perception of good looks. Now hold that thought on looks because I'm going to come back to this later down the line. But let me finish explaining this whole extrinsic confidence bit first. Now, ever since returning to Singapore after working in London for 2 years, I've gone to multiple meetups to try to rebuild a social circle here. And one thing that I realized that a lot of people tend to do is they tend to qualify to others in these metrics as well. They'll talk a bit about what car they drive. Oh, I just parked downstairs. I have 4 Porsches, or even things that my female friends will tell me, especially those who are not originally from Singapore. They will talk about how guys a lot of the time tend to try to sell themselves by boasting on dates, such as what brands they wear, what Rolex that they are looking to buy, and all of this materialistic stuff that people tend to use to qualify themselves to others. Now, that is all well and good if that result works for you, right? But the problem with this, I realized, and personally I've experienced this myself as well, is that this kind of confidence is very, very fragile. You can think of it as, your building has foundations, and those foundations just go down to very, very shallow levels of depth. This is actually an interesting story about what I experienced while I was in London. Back then, I was not only working in a bank, at the same time, I was also consulting with a crypto startup and doing my own copywriting agency on the side. I've talked about this before, so if you know my old channel, then you will know what I actually went about doing. But nonetheless, by putting all of these together, I was making pretty good money for my age. And at that point in time, I actually derived a lot of confidence from this because I had never grown up with money. And in the past, I've always thought that if I were to sort this stuff out, then it will make me that much more confident and that much more, approvable in people's eyes. And that actually resonated with the friend group that I was in. I was joining an Asian meetup, and there were these guys from Hong Kong who were all talking about what business ideas they have and all of that kind of stuff. And every time someone said something, they'll try to one-up each other. But over time, what I realized was that people tended to move away or gravitate away from these individuals. And that is when I realized, you can't really explicitly sell yourself to someone else because then you just look try hard and people will probably think, what else is this guy insecure about? So if that doesn't work, what's the next level? And the next level, I like to call it fake intrinsic. Apparently, ChatGPT tells me is kind of similar to this thing called introjected regulation. The whole concept of what I call fake intrinsic is that your self-image still depends on these external achievements and presentation. So if I have a bad month in my business, I might think that that is a bad thing. If I don't get a promotion this year in my job, then I might feel bad about myself internally. And if I do well, I feel good about it, but I don't outwardly show it. In this stage of fake intrinsic, you're able to kind of hide it sufficiently such that you downplay or only signal your extrinsic value. Generally speaking, you don't talk too much about about your achievements, and for the most part, when you interact with people, you're having a pretty down-to-earth or honest conversation, which is a good thing and one step above the whole qualifying behavior thing that everyone seems to do. However, similar to the extrinsic confidence, once you lose whatever you derive your confidence from, all that confidence that's built upon all these material things is attacked, and once again, you end up in a not so great place. So this level of confidence will get you, well, attainable success, but it may not be sustainable over the long term, because life has its way of just throwing punches at you in every direction. You might think you're doing well for like a few years and then something goes wrong, right? So there is a final level, which is going to be the intrinsic confidence, and this is the most fundamental level and depends on the belief that you have value in your own right, notwithstanding all the external achievements you have. So that is that intrinsic value or self-worth that you place on yourself, even if we remove all of these material items and all of your achievements. And this lesson actually came from two things. First was the crypto startup work that I was talking about, and second is this whole hair loss slash shaving it bald journey. So firstly, I worked in a crypto startup, but after a while, during the bear market, that I'm pretty sure that if you invested in this market, you will know what happened in 2023 and 2024. The market really wasn't doing well. There was just very little funding and the startup was running on fumes. So after my consults with them was scaled back quite a bit, I found myself frantically trying out other side hustles, content ideas on my old channel, and trying to achieve a certain outcome. But all of this came to a head when I decided to shave it bald. Now, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I've been trying to cover up this thinning hair issue with this thing called Topic. It is basically a hair fiber that comes in the form of a powder that you sprinkle on top of your head to cover thinning spots. And the fundamental belief behind this was that my own self-worth or my own self-image was based on how people saw me, and secondly, that people would think less of me if they knew that I had thinning hair. And I suspect that this is the case for many people who are concerned with this whole male pattern hair loss issue, especially in Asia, where it is typically seen to be not the template, attractive upper look. And then after realizing that, this actually didn't really affect me too much, I haven't tried all of these online dating and meetup stuff just yet, so stay tuned for that. And if I can get comfortable in my own skin and lean into my genetics rather than trying to fight it all of the time, then once I build up sufficient confidence, then the confidence that I actually build up will be on a more fundamental level, which, using the same analogy, would be like having foundations that go down to the bedrock rather than just into shallow soil. And that brings me on to my final point. Some of you might ask, isn't it just about being attractive rather than being confident? Well, that brings me back to what I told you to keep in mind in the first point about extrinsic confidence. What you realize is that a lot of people who grew up with good looks, they just won the genetic lottery, they also tend to carry themselves more confidently. They've been given positive feedback from a young age, so they're more apt to believe that they themselves are valued despite everything that they've worked for, because they never had to work for that positive validation or positive feedback when they were younger. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Leave a comment down below. Now, if you like this kind of content, we're going to be coming up with more such content addressing less talked about issues pertaining to the young male population, particularly in Asia. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, do subscribe to this channel and stay tuned. With all that being said, that is all from me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.